There we are. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am thrilled with how many of you are here, and really deeply full of joy for what's possible this evening. And I am also deeply, deeply grateful that Doreen Point is here, Lesbeth, and she is going to do an opening. I learned just in the process of preparing for tonight that she and her husband of 61 years were the first couple to adopt Aboriginal foster kids. And they adopted 4 in the end, and so that they had a total of 11 children.
Wow.
And 18 grandchildren and 9 great-grandchildren. Okay,
Wow.
the one I was reading is out of there, I think. And she works now, amongst other things, as a language support and resident elder for the Tla'amin education system. And that involves being in schools like Westview, working one-on-one with Aboriginal kids who are learning Ayuttham. And she also works in the daycare. So she's a knowledge keeper, and we are really, really blessed to have you here to open our session.
Thank you so much. I don't know why I get nervous when I say a prayer.
It's okay.
My name is Doreen Point. My traditional name is Lesbeth. Chachaha Tanapich means I honor you all. Imut Kwayagan Tanishti Nanat. I'm happy to be here with you this evening. I thank my Creator, my great-grandparents and great-grandmother for the safe journey through the night. Jachach, Shetebus, Hegetus Kukpa, Chichia, Paisoti of Natumas, Leached. I also thank wonderful Mother Earth for the beautiful day. Jachach, Tan Skidja, Uktam Ajum Shkunatit. For the blowing wind and all that it touches. Hanatumalist home, Uktam Bloch Pupuotas. For the flowing waters and all that it nourishes. Hanatumalist Paye, Uktam Tla'amin Papa. For all things green and growing. Hanatumalist Kasam, Uktam Papa. And we give thanks to our Creator for another moment to experience all these beautiful things. Chachas, Shetebus, Uktam Hanatumas, Pichus, Unus, Ajumish. We also give thanks to the sun that rises to begin each new day. And the sun also ends each new day, every day, sorry. Let's take a moment to thank the Creator for all our other blessings, our lives, our health, our families, our friends, and our elders, as we come together tonight. And welcome to our traditional territory, so that we can always show gratitude and respect as we take care of this land that was gifted to us. Lastly, Creator, I pray that all my brothers and sisters will be blessed with these 7 cultural values: courage, energy, hope, love, knowledge, strength, and wisdom. Teach us to walk together with balance and dignity, so that our humility will come to us, and I may be a guiding light to all my relations.
Thank you. Oops, sorry. Sorry.
Oh,
Thank you so much.
So thank you, Doreen. Yeah, thank you for the love and light and beautiful energy that you bring here. Yeah. Yeah, because this is a container. We're creating a container together. And I want to honor and acknowledge that Mayor Wasnow is here, and Councillor Southcott, and our new CAO, Lisa Bokal-Singh, and so many people who are deeply involved in these issues here. Very grateful excited to be here all together. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Kate Sutherland. I have worked as a consultant and coach and facilitator and educator in community and organizational change. And that's touched on issues like food security, literacy, community economic development, recovery from substance use, education, local food systems, local currency systems, a lot of different ways in. Yes?
Excuse me, is your mic working?
I hope so.
Yes.
But is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Thank you for the comment. Yeah. So I was also co-founding faculty for Simon Fraser University's certificate in social innovation, and for a program called Think, the School of Leadership for Creative, Think School of Creative Leadership. And when I moved here 2.5 years ago, I was drawn to this place in part wanting to see what was possible here, having worked to do practical change and worked also in capacity building. What feels to me really the most powerful thing to do is to do place-based work that demonstrates what's possible. And so I've been in conversation with Amanda, whom I first met in 2014 in Scotland. She came to a workshop I gave on facilitation that was a week-long, a whole week of people together, and we became pretty good friends and have been in touch with each other over Zoom and as mutual mentors ever since. And it was in a conversation about the work that I'm hoping to do here that Amanda was inspired to come. And so it's my great honor to introduce my friend and colleague, Dr. Amanda Cahill, which is how you pronounce her last name. Yeah, do you want to come up?
Yeah.
Yeah. She is the founder and CEO of an organization, a nonprofit in Australia called the Next Economy, and she's supported regions and districts across Australia to transform their economies. The core of that work is convening conversations, often in contexts of polarization and conflict, to help people come together and find ways forward that work for everyone and that work for the planet. And so this involves building on local strengths and assets, and she cultivates the conditions for the seeds that are already in the community to grow and flourish. And so I initially thought, hey, Amanda, can you come and plant some seeds here? And the more I've been thinking about it, and what I'm deeply aware of is that she is actually nourishing the seeds that are here. So that all of us are the seeds, and she's going to bring some water and some sun and convene us so that hopefully we can do lots more together going forward. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kate.
Yeah.
I don't know about bringing sunshine, which is what you would think an Australian would bring to Canada. I brought snow, which was actually delightful for me because it's only the second time that I'd experienced it actually snowing when I arrived in Vancouver. So Canada has been bringing so many beautiful experiences to me already. So thank you, Kate, for that lovely introduction and for the invitation to come around the world to be here. And thank you, Doreen, for such a warm welcome and prayer. That means a lot to me. I would like to acknowledge the Tla'amin Nation. I'm sorry for my pronunciation. And as the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on here today. I normally live on the lands of the Yagara and Turrbal peoples, and I would like to pay my respect to the elders of this land and the land that I come from, and to really acknowledge the work of First Nations peoples all around the world who protect and care for country in an ongoing way, because we're all beneficiaries of those thousands of years of work. So thank you. So yes, I'm from Australia, about as far away from here as you can get on the planet. And I feel really honoured and privileged and humbled to be here. Just to get a bit of a taste of what it's like to live in this spectacularly beautiful place that you call home. So what I'd like to do tonight is to share with you our experiences that we're seeing in Australia, working with regional communities who are going through a lot of changes. We've got a similar economy in a way to Canada as a whole. We've had a history of being very dependent on extractive industries, resourcing, mining, logging, livestock farming. I'm also going to touch on, probably more in the Q&A rather than the presentation. I was lucky enough to spend 2 months in Europe last year looking at how communities across Europe were also meeting the challenges that many small communities are facing all around the world. So the plan is I'm only going to talk for about hopefully 25-30 minutes so that we can actually get into some discussion, but the really exciting bit is the second part from about 7 o'clock, where we're going to get you talking about what's special about this place, because just in the last couple of days that I've been here, there are so many amazing things bubbling up, and sometimes it takes someone like me to come in to make it visible to the people who are actually living it every day. So we're going to get into that discussion from about 7. But who am I? So the organisation I work for is called The Next Economy. I started it 6 years ago, and we work with rural and regional communities across Australia that are struggling with economic change. And the idea is, how do we actually work with those challenges to find ways to strengthen that economy, create new jobs, attract in new income and investment, but in ways that are actually climate safe, climate resilient, are regenerating and doing the work that we need to actually protect our natural environment, but also doing it in a way that's socially just. Like, it's not just about jobs, but it's like, what's the kind of work that needs to be done to sustain this community, and what's good work look like as we move forward? So our guiding question is, what does good economic development look like? In a way, development that enhances the well-being of both people and the planet. How do we move past this jobs versus environment thing? Because it is false. If we don't have a healthy environment, we don't live. But we do need jobs, and we need to support our livelihoods. So we need to get past that kind of competition that gets set up. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the challenges, but also some of the emerging opportunities. Now, normally I would hit you with lots of examples of lots of different communities and what they're doing. But I'm going to do something different tonight, because being here has reminded me of a community that I've worked with in Australia. So I'm going to go deep into the story of one community and how change got catalysed by the work of a group of women in a way that created a whole lot of economic benefits that nobody expected. So first, so what do we do? So we're a small not-for-profit economic development agency. We work all over Australia, and most of the work that we've been doing has actually been in coal mining communities. So I actually started out in energy, in places where there was clashes between climate activists and mostly workers in the union movement around the future of coal. So is this going to work if I do this? Yeah. So the main coal regions are up here in central Queensland, down here in the Hunter Valley, and I'm going to be talking about a place in the Hunter Valley, down here around Melbourne, and then over in Perth. So in Australia, it's probably not a surprise, I don't think, that Australia is one of the largest coal and gas exporters in the world. So we're in an interesting situation where, in terms of electricity, we have enough solar and wind resources and huge renewable energy projects going in to produce enough electricity for Australia. That's not the contentious part. The contentious part is the export revenue that we depend on. And so it's become a very political issue, and there's big questions about how do you replace that massive industry that employs a lot of people in Australia. So there has been a lot of conflict, and in the context of growing climate impacts, most people know us now for having some of the worst climate impacts already in the world. We have had, over the last, we had about a decade of this being a very politicised issue, and that's our former Prime Minister holding up a lump of coal in Parliament House, and he famously kissed it and said, "Why are people afraid of this thing? This is on what our wealth is based." And it's true, there are a lot of jobs created through this industry, but it has been purposefully politicised. Interestingly though, it's these same regions which is where the big renewable energy projects are going in, because they have a lot of solar resources and wind resources as well. So this is good news. This is creating jobs, but they're different kinds of jobs to what people identify with as a real job and an ongoing job and a well-paid job. It will produce enough electricity to keep the industries going that are co-located with that coal-fired electricity plants, but it's still very contentious and conflicted. Whoops. It's lunchtime in Australia. So if I lose my place, I'm going to blame jet lag. So energy has been a major focus of our work, and I'll talk about a community that was in conflict around the future of fossil fuels soon. But the other type of community that we're starting to do a lot of work with is questions around how do we decarbonise the land sector, and where are the opportunities in regeneration, because there is a huge amount, like crazy, billions of dollars of worth of both carbon credits, but also biodiversity credits that are coming in with the new commitments. And that's both public money, but interestingly private money that's been committed into communities to do land management differently. So the areas in Australia where this is becoming a really big issue right now, and where we're getting forestry communities coming to us, is down in Victoria, down here, and in WA. Both states have just now banned all logging in all old growth forest. And it was sudden, like it was kind of coming for a long time, but it was also a surprise. So it's still shocking, and it's still, they've done it without the economic planning to identify what happens to those communities. Now, a lot of the loggers, there actually hasn't been a lot of logging, particularly in Victoria, for a long time, because they put a moratorium on it before the ban. But nobody's thought about the community as a whole and what's going to sustain those towns that have been very dependent on forestry. So that it's still a big issue or question mark around what happens to those towns into the future. So yes, in one way that for the environment that's a good thing, but what about the people? Interestingly, in Tasmania, it's a very live discussion because they haven't banned logging in old growth forests. There's a very strong plantation industry, but they're asking the question now, can we get ahead of any decisions and no matter what, actually have a different conversation about diversifying the economic base into the future? What would it take in terms of investment to do that? So the tensions in coal mining communities and tensions in forestry communities, there's a lot of parallel there. But in a way, I think forestry might be harder. I mean, first of all, because I'm just starting my journey in forestry and there's a lot to learn, but also because the tensions are a lot longer. But clashes between environment groups and loggers, that's been going on for decades. And there's still a need for timber. Timber itself hasn't been outlawed in a way that coal kind of is being phased out. So there are some really big questions remaining. So I'm just going to turn off the slides for a minute. So what I'm seeing in terms of the conversations that's starting to emerge, there's a few interesting themes. And the first thing is that the change right now is that there is money available to invest in economic opportunities that wasn't there before. Before, when things closed down, you had to turn to the government for handouts for redundancies. Now there's private finance that's going into wanting to actually support people to do the work of managing forests in a different way, to protect biodiversity and sequester carbon. And we're talking about billions of dollars. The challenge that with investors that I'm meeting is that they don't have the projects, they don't know how to get the money into the communities that they're needed, or even if they find a project, that the project's not big enough for the scale of investment they need. So we've got a mismatch at the moment, but it's an opportunity. The other really interesting theme that's coming out, which is a really important opportunity, is some really robust and important conversations in the land sector around the role of First Nations people as traditional owners in managing country, so in a country of land, and exploring how they can address long-term economic injustices and access to land. So there's a change, there's a disruption. Where's the opportunity to do things differently with this? So the common theme across the context we're working with is the question of how do communities manage multiple interlocking external pressures and shocks, whether we're talking about the impact of COVID, changing trade demand for products, the move to net zero emissions, the rising cost of living, housing issues, severe climate impacts, and the list goes on. And how do we do this at a time where there is so much uncertainty? There's change happening very quickly and ongoing, and when the trust in institutions is at an all-time low. So for a lot of people, the future's not looking very hopeful. How do you work with that? Our response is to meet each community where it's at, recognising that each place is different, and to find ways to bring different people together to explore who they are, analyse their own situation rather than turn to experts to tell them what to do, and look at different options that are available to them to manage economic risk and take advantage of emerging opportunities, even when they're uncertain about the future. It's to work with people to work out what the next best step is based on their unique context and combination of assets, skills, and their identity in place, to trust that they know their place better than anyone else, and so the best place to find ways forward that work for everyone and the environment. So what do we do in this picture? So I think there's kind of 4 things that we've been asked to do, and the organisation's developed out of what we've been asked to do. It's not we thought this up and went out. I reluctantly set up this organisation after 5 years of people saying, can you come and do this? So there's a gap in the conversation here. So the first was to work with local leaders to explore the range of economic opportunities to manage risk and seize new opportunities by looking at what was emerging in the climate space. So often this is at the request of local government or provincial level governments, but sometimes it's community groups and sometimes it's industry. And we work with them to develop economic transition plans. So we get into the nuts and bolts of how do we go from here to there, not just what it looks like on the other side. And sometimes it's lighter touch, it's just doing presentations to get people aware of what the opportunities are. So the second thing that we do, which makes us makes us different to just a general consulting group, is that we work with local leaders to take what we're learning on the ground and turn that into policy recommendations. So we're in a time of change also at a government level where governments don't really know what to do about some of this stuff. They know that what they've done in the past where industries have failed hasn't worked very well. They're looking to communities to say, well, what else do you want us to do? And so there's been a space where local government leaders have been able to step into in Australia in the last 18 months with a change of government to actually directly influence design of policy in places where they've actually started to take action themselves. So we've actually had quite a lot of success in directly influencing and designing policy at a state and federal level. How do we support communities to get to net zero, but make sure no one's left behind in that process? The third thing we do is something that, again, is sort of surprising to me, is we've had big banks, pension funds and private equity firms contacting us, and I know nothing about finance, although I'm learning very fast, saying, we don't know how to get the money to where it's needed to go. Can you tell us, do you have a project that you can recommend? We don't have the financial means yet to actually meet what's actually the need on the ground. But there is a need there is an interest in channeling these funds to projects that are acting on climate change but also regenerative. And in response to that, we're actually running an investor trip with people to one of the sites that we work in a coal region, saying, well, come and hear from the locals and they'll tell you what they need to do and you can figure it out from there. And the final thing that we do is kind of, again, the fun bit, but I think it's probably the most impactful bit, is to actually just share positive stories of change, because there are people all over the world figuring this stuff out and it's not perfect. But I think we need to learn more and more from community to community so people have more confidence to take that action. So we do a lot of media presentations and things like that. So that's what we do, but what does it actually look like in practice? So as I said, I can tell lots of stories, and probably in the Q&A I can give you more examples. But I want to talk about this one community called Gloucester in New South Wales. Gloucester is a town of about just over 3,000 people, and it's in the Upper Hunter Valley, which is a major coal mining region, and it's about 3 hours drive from Sydney. So I think you guys can appreciate this as in another country that's as big as Australia. 3 hours seems like a long way, but it's long enough away that you don't just, you're out of the city, but it's still fairly close. And so they're getting a lot of people moving from Sydney into the area, particularly older people who want to live in the country. So it's in a beautiful valley surrounded by the Bucket Ranges, which you can see in the middle picture. Oh, sorry. Thank you. There you go, Gloucester. So that's the Bucket Ranges there, which are culturally very significant as a sacred men's site. And the town was historically established and grown on the back of the dairy, beef and logging industries, with some people also travelling to work in a nearby coal mine that was established in 1995, but then other people in the town are very active in the environmental movement of opposing. Things in the town really came to a head about 15 years ago, when resources companies gained approval to explore for LNG, you know what that means, yep, good, in the area, and they put in some test wells. And the town became very polarised around this issue, with half of the town believing that the development of the gas industry was what was needed to bring in new investment and jobs, to places where at that time there were a lot of shops in the main street that were empty. The other half were fighting tooth and nail to stop the industry from being developed for both climate reasons and to protect underground water systems. The opposition was made up not just of environmentally concerned people, but also a lot of farmers who were worried about the impact on agricultural land. Tensions came to a boiling point about a month before the local government was to make a decision about whether to buy back the licences granted to the companies or whether the companies would be allowed to go ahead. And like the town, the council, the local government, was split very much down the centre. So in this context of uncertainty and tension, there was a group of women, and it was actually only about 3 or 4 of these women at the time, who had not been actively involved in either the pro or anti-gas movements. They were the women who were like, this is just too hard, I'm stepping out of this. But they were really distressed at the thought that no matter what the council decided, half the town was going to be unhappy and the tension and conflict would continue. They asked, what if we could bring together people to explore what a positive, more sustainable and economically prosperous future would look like for the town, regardless of what happened with the gas industry? How do we shift this conversation so people can come together around what they really care about, which is a future for everyone in this place? So I got a phone call from a small group of these women who, and they said they wanted to hold a festival in the town over the weekend and invite people from other communities that could tell a positive story about places where people were making their place better and they were dealing with challenges on their own terms. And they wanted some advice on how to set up the weekend in a way that could bring people together and not inadvertently divide them even further. And I didn't have anything to tell them because they'd already figured it out. They wanted to showcase positive examples that led to economic benefits and made the town more livable and resilient. And they also wanted to celebrate what was good about their town by inviting artists and local producers to showcase their wares. So everybody was welcome to participate in the festival. So they ended up with quite an interesting program. They had like experts like, me talking about, what was happening with coal markets and the future of fossil fuels and what people could do about that. They had people doing workshops on community-owned renewable energy. They had massage tents. They had singing workshops and artistry, and it was just fun and delightful. And they had a budget, I think, about $2,500, I think, something like that. But they pulled together, I think to start off, I don't know if they ended up with some small business sponsorship on top of that, but it was pretty small budget. But they pulled together the Gloucester Sustainable Futures Festival, and they were very nervous about how people were going to respond at a time when there was so much tension in the town. My role, after the traditional welcome to country by the local First Nations elder and the mayor, was to give an overview of the challenges hitting regional communities and give examples of how other communities were coming together to tackle climate change while generating economic benefits, and also to run a workshop to help people identify the strengths and assets they could build on to start new enterprises. It was a 1.5-hour workshop. And there was also an amazing woman who spoke after me who was experienced in setting up community-owned renewable energy projects from the Community Power Agency. To the surprise of the women who were organising the weekend, the room was overflowing with people. I think they were hoping maybe for 120 people, but they had 150 people. There were people standing up in the back, and the numbers kept growing as the weekend went on. Also surprising was that the local mayor, who said he wasn't going to come, which they convinced that he had to do the welcome, because that was his job, and then he stayed for the first couple of presentations, and then he stayed for morning tea, and then he stayed for lunch, and then he was the last person in the pub on the Saturday night. Because he got caught up in this really positive vibe and the idea that there were other opportunities that people hadn't really thought of before. The real turning point came, however, on the Sunday morning, when the facilitator asked people if they had any ideas overnight of what could happen next. Two men who were sitting towards the back of the room stood up, and I will never forget the gasp from the room of horror. It turned out that these two men, who had grown up together and been childhood friends, hadn't spoken to each other for 5 years over the gas issue. They stood up to announce to the room that they were so inspired by the conversations in the workshops in the previous day on identifying the strengths of the town and the potential for community energy, that they'd decided the night before at the pub that they were going to set up a community-owned renewable energy project. They had already set a date and a time for the meeting, and they invited everyone to join them, saying that if they could get over their differences, anyone could. They later reached out to the Community Power Agency and me to help them actually organise their first meetings. They started with putting solar on the rooftop of the neighbourhood centre, and then another rooftop project, and then their third project was a multi-million-dollar solar farm. The project is locally owned and the money is staying in the community. But that wasn't the only enterprise that came out of that weekend. During the workshops, when we asked people to brainstorm their assets, infrastructure, skills and interests, a group of women artists worked out that the empty shops in the street could be used to host pop-up exhibitions because there were all these tourists that would travel through the town. A woman from the local neighbourhood centre linked the discussion about the number of young people and joblessness and the fact that they were leaving early from school to the fact that the neighbourhood centre had a fully equipped commercial kitchen that was not being used. And so they started a youth hospitality training centre and catering business. Another project, a middle-aged couple who'd moved from Sydney to the region, built on the fact that they had this constant flow of visitors coming to check out the town as a nice place to live. So they started an annual tree changer, so come live in the trees, tree changer weekend to host small groups to come to the town, and they linked with other enterprises to showcase the artists and the permaculture garden and other things in the town. Some dairy farmers got together to look at how they could use the old dairy to add value to their milk and produce new products like cheese. So that one weekend and those workshops, designed to bring the town together about what they loved when the town was split around this other issue, led to the development of 5 new enterprises. But it didn't stop there. What was also interesting was that the change it had politically. So the mayor, who was this lovely man, he was a dairy farmer by background, and he just was so overwhelmed by the conflict in the town, and his whole attitude shifted when he could see people coming together around possibilities. And so did some of the councillors. And so a month later, they voted to buy back the gas licences because they could see that there were other possibilities. And it proved very important about 5 years later when they had one of the worst droughts ever on record, called the Millennial Drought. And their water reserves did end up drying up, but they dried up a lot later than they would have if the gas industry had gone ahead, and they were able to recover the underground water systems faster when it started raining. And the impacts were not just local. Other local governments across the region were inspired by what the council had done and having the courage to buy back the licences. And so they approached the mayor for advice and support, which led to a first ban on new gas developments across the entire region. So the impact from the first Sustainable Futures weekend was so profound that the women decided that it should be a regular event, and they've now held 3. One of the more significant developments out of this was that the weekend became a way for First Nations people to get involved front and centre in conversation about economic futures and have their culture as part of the heritage of the town celebrated. And that happened in the second one. It didn't happen in the first one. There wasn't a strong Indigenous presence in the first one, but there was a real focus on that on the second. And that led to some profound healing and discussions about the identity of the town. And the economic impacts also continued, with the reputation of the town declaring a sustainable green future was what they wanted, started to attract different kinds of businesses, including a manufacturer of camper vans, RVs, and camping equipment, which was well known in Australia, a very famous brand of camping equipment. And they said, we're relocating to this town and bringing jobs and apprenticeships because of what you stand for and your commitment to climate action. So what happened? Like, this is an amazing story. I'm not saying it was easy, but there was something magical about the timing of what happened. So 4 things I think jump out at me because they're jumping out in other places around the world that I'm seeing this kind of transformative change. First of all, it started from within. The conversation started locally and invited everyone. It made it easy for everyone to participate that. It wasn't imposed from the outside. This wasn't a government consultation asking people's opinion. It was people saying, okay, what are we going to do for ourselves? But at the same time, they weren't isolating themselves from the outside either. They said, this is what we want to do, and then they reached out for the expertise and resources as they needed it. The women who organised the event, they reached out to speakers to come in. The men who organised the community energy project went out to organisations to help them and then helped get some external grants to get that project going. The second thing was that they focused on strengths and assets as a starting point for identifying economic opportunities. So often, particularly communities that have been dependent on one major industry, are looking for that next big silver bullet industry to replace it. It seems like the only way. But unfortunately, it's not really how things are working anymore, and where it does happen, you see this boom and bust cycle. So, and you have to hand over a lot of decision making generally to large multinational companies, so you're giving away a lot of your power and resources and often land to that. So increasingly communities are seeing that economic resilience comes with diversification and not putting all your eggs in one basket. But this starts by building on what you've got first. Exploring the assets, the infrastructure, the resources and skills, and having the space to explore the range of products and services that you can possibly build that maybe you haven't done before, but you can innovate off that. Mapping these strengths and how things are connected in place also enables the opportunity for identifying value-adding opportunities, but also thinking about circularity. So instead of seeing the production of this one thing in this linear way that creates this waste and another problem we have to address, I'm seeing in places where they're saying, okay, well, this industry over here produces, so the sugarcane industry in another place that we're working in creates a whole lot of agricultural biomass. So they're looking at multiple uses for that, whether it's turning it into compost or composting, or as an energy fuel for the mill, or feed for livestock. And actually now they're starting to look at as a replacement for plastic and new forms of packaging from the sugarcane fibre. The third thing that I think jumps out from this case study is that economic diversification and resilience also comes from having diversity in terms of the business models that reflect that place. So one of the reasons that the enterprises in this case study were able to start quickly wasn't that they went, okay, now we need to start a business, we need to do a business course, do a feasibility study, do a business plan, then get a loan. They started by, one, going to a not-for-profit in the town and just saying, can you just auspice us? Can you host us so we can just get going? So you manage all the governance and we can just start. And in the energy project, they started a cooperative. And so there was a process there where more people could get involved, more people could give money to it, and it could actually then keep that money in the place. And finally, by focusing on what united people and what they loved about their place and their shared concerns, they were able to move beyond polarisation to find ways to work together. By approaching the conversation in this way, they gave people permission and the space to step out of having to identify with one side or the other, to look at other ways to tackle the challenge and the need for economic development, which was really the thing underneath it. It wasn't about gas, it was about how we're going to get jobs and investment into this town. And that led to unexpected enterprises being developed that people wouldn't have thought of before. This approach also ultimately led to stronger relationships with the local First Nations community, and they ended up inspiring other communities to adopt similar approaches that impacted on state policies around the approvals of gas, around the gas industry. So this is just one example of one small town at the opposite end of the planet to here. And like this community here, every community is unique. And yet the challenges and the opportunities, there's a bit of a trend and a pattern as we navigate towards a climate resilient planet where we need a lot to regenerate as well. Please take what you will from this story and leave whatever's not relevant. And if I can be of any help into the future, let me know. Thank you.
Yeah. Deep thank you, Amanda, for your stories, for distilling the principles out of it, and for helping it be sticky, memorable. So Amanda is going to, and this is a time for question and answer, and we want to make the most of it, so we're hoping you can keep questions concise and focused on clarifying or deepening your understanding of what she's brought to our attention.
Yeah, remembering we're going to have lots of time for discussion as well to go deeper with each other. Is there any questions? Yeah.
I have one. There has been a lot of conversation in terms of economic development about bringing the private sector with the public sector and the community. Is that part of the conversation taking place in this and bringing the three actors together?
Yep. So just for people up the back, the question is, there's been increasing discussion about how you bringing private, public finance as well as community together, and was that part of the discussion? It wasn't a focus, it was just like people just wanted to start doing stuff and then they figured out the finance around it. But interestingly, right now, I was having a discussion with some colleagues in US and the UK the other day, and we were talking about there needs to actually be more discussion around the implications of different kinds of finance, because we still need large companies to produce things en masse for some things that's actually appropriate, but we also need different things that are actually more local, more small scale, and they need different kinds of finance. Part of the problem at the moment is with all the climate agreements and biodiversity agreements, all of your big companies are saying we want to do the right thing, so they're donating, saying we're going to commit all of this money to this, but actually a lot of the work that needs to be done doesn't match the current financing mechanism. So there's private finance that works in a way that does certain things, but we need it to do different things. There's public money that we still need, and it actually should be government's job to fund it because it creates accountability and neutrality. And there are things that maybe private companies shouldn't own, and that's always up for debate. And then there's community finance, which can do other things that they will never get a private loan for, and government politically might not want to support. So there's some really interesting examples of not just crowdfunding, but crowd equity, where communities have gotten together to buy really important things to their town. So in Australia, they've done things like bought the pub or bought the cafe as the only meeting space that's left in the town. Another group I'm involved with who do a lot of food sovereignty work in getting fair prices to farmers and getting food to people in the city, bought the shed that they were spending $100,000 renting every year. So the community bought that shed. So there's some really innovative things happening that you can tap into, and there's a lot of information. Other questions? Yeah.
Point of information, what's the population of Gloucester?
Just over 3,000 people, and actually it jumped from about 2,500 people in the 2016 census to just over 3,000 in the 2020 census, which is actually a significant population boost. Yeah. Up the back.
Yeah, you mentioned that in many ways the state or provincial governments were looking to learn what communities wanted, but I'm wondering if there were any existing policies at the state or provincial level that helped enable any of this?
In this example and others, what's interesting is where communities are innovating and pushing and just wanting to get on with things, they tend to come up against barriers. So, for example, cooperatives, the laws are different in each state. So some are better than others. So often, so what's interesting is the role of NGOs as intermediaries who can then, as you're helping someone with a project and you keep coming up, oh, that's that regulation in the way, or actually we need this regulation in place which would make it easier for us to do it. So the role of NGOs, the civil society, has become important as a conduit to get that information to state and federal government or even industry and saying, you know what, if you just did this, it would make it easier for everyone to get on with that. Or to push for change where it's actually not maybe in government or industry interest for communities to actually start doing this stuff. So it's a live space because the number of public servants I'm meeting, and including in Europe, who are just out of their depth because everything is changing so fast. So often I've found when we go to them saying, here's a real life case study of a good thing that you want to see happen, here's the evidence from around the world to back it up, and here are some solutions, and here's some things that we think that if you just tweak to this, it would, and having quite a lot of gratitude, because we're not from the public servant saying, great, we can look into that, and making their job a bit easier when they're struggling too. I'm not saying they take on everything, and politically they're always squeezed by the politicians, but I think there's an opening more at the moment that might not be open for long, but there is an opening to start to influence that because it's all under review. And they've got pressure on them. There were some questions, yeah?
You've been here for a very short time.
Yeah.
And you don't have to answer in any detail.
I probably won't.
Whilst you've been here, did anything strike you as striking a thought like, have these people here thought about doing this or that?
I'm not going to answer that. Because that's what we're going to talk about next. I'm interested in what comes up for people as I was talking about, oh, what about that? Or I thought about that long ago, what happened to that idea? Deb, and then we'll go down the back.
You talked about the two different groups and they clashed. How badly did they clash? Like, we have some clashes here and they can get quite bad.
Yep.
I mean, obviously not everybody came around to this conference and it was all happy days, but did they start from a place of fair animosity?
Yeah. Yeah. So the challenge, so it was getting more and more contentious because this became the site for some of the environment groups that they thought they could win on the gas front as well, or it was the next decision to be made. And so there had been a lot of protesters coming in from outside, and that doesn't go down well in most small towns. And so, the former mayor who was leading the environment kind of charge, this very formidable woman, was getting death threats. Yeah, so in other places around the coal mining, the picture I showed of the coal worker, proud coal worker, that was the site. I don't know if some people would have heard of the Adani mine, which was the next biggest coal development in Australia, in the world. And it became kind of the front line for Australian environmental activism. If they could stop that project, that was it. So the environment movement put a lot of resources into that. And there were actual violent clashes when a convoy led by the guy who set up the Greens Party in Australia, the first in the world, basically went from Tasmania in the south and did a road trip all the way up the coast to central Queensland, the first circle up there, which is probably 2,000 to 3,000 kilometres. And he'd collect people in the cities as he went to all converge on this festival to demonstrate just before the election that people didn't want the Adani Carmichael mine. So all the Conservative politicians then organised a different group of people to converge, and what happened was someone got a bit excited on the back of a horse and decided to ride the horse through the protest group and hurt a woman quite badly. And it shocked Australia, because we're not used to violence. We're used to people having their say. And there was a lot of backlash against the environment movement, and a lot of people credit that election was supposed to go to Labor. You understand? Our Labor Party, everyone was like, they're going to win. And as soon as that happened, it was a complete backlash, and the more conservative coal-kissing guy got back in, which nobody thought was going to happen. Like, nobody, even the Conservatives, didn't think was going to happen. So that became, and after that, nobody could talk about coal. So before that, I was getting invited in to do economic development lectures on, well, if we act on climate change, what are the opportunities? And I'd get the Chamber of Commerce person organising people to come. And then that event happened, and then people said to me, I love your work and we need this here, we need to diversify, but I can't be seen to associate with anything that even smells like climate change. And I'm like, this isn't about climate change, this is about your industry is in decline, whether you like it or not. You have to start now. Changing industries takes decades, like if you want to invest properly. And they said, we know that, but we can't, I might lose my job. So it took about 18 months for people to recover from that incident. So it's been very tense. Yeah.
So we're okay.
So you got no excuse.
Better than some.
I think we had somebody up the back first. Yep.
My question is more about what kind of container do you have to create socially for people to reorient themselves to talk in a different way, to communicate in a different way, but especially people who have different interests or backgrounds, whether it be government or communities, because there's a general, like the polarization thing, and people don't really know how to sit in disagreement. And so I just wondered if there's a process or any of these different social containers, architecture to help support that.
It depends on who you're working with, what the context is, and who the group is. My starting point for what's working for us is, number one, we only go where we're invited. Because the work we're doing, we're not there to convince anybody, we're there to get them to figure out how do we navigate change. So they have to be open to that conversation. They have to accept that whether they like change, whether they like it or not, change is happening. So that's our first, for us as an NGO coming in from the outside, we need the invitation. But in terms of how then you set up the process or what processes you use, it completely depends on the group and what motivates them, what are they interested in. Generally, they're interested in us because we're talking about we're framing this challenge as an economic challenge, because it is. Whether it's about the livability of a region or the future of the region, it's about what do we produce and how do we organise work and how do we exchange things. These are economic questions. So that tends to be politically more neutral. So that's been helpful. But if we're doing work with a trade union group, we're going to use a very different approach to if we're working with a very active environmental activist group, in the language that we use, the presentations and things like that. And that's different to a very conservative political party. So, and I think testament to what we've been doing is I've now worked with all of the three major parties. They've asked for advice. So the Greens Party, the Labor Party, and the LNP, which is a Conservative party, have asked direct. So, and we will talk to anyone. So we have to be very clear, because if you want to know, we can help you explore what the actual options are, and using evidence to back that up, and then trusting them that they will find their way with that. Yeah.
Can you also speak to working in one community with varieties of stakeholders?
And in terms of working in one community where there's division, again, it depends. It depends on where they're at. So generally what we do is we will spend time doing one-on-one interviews with people to actually find out what's going on. We'll talk to local government, we'll talk to whatever relevant community group, the business community, industry, to get a sense of what's going on. And through that process that we then design what we're doing. Usually what we'll do most situations is have a closed door, confidential, lay it on the table meeting with decision makers, so government, whatever relevant levels in that, primarily local government, sometimes provincial, with industry in the room, because often they know they're making decisions behind closed doors that public don't know about. So that's the first step, is to keep that safe. And then we'll always have a public forum or a set of forums or a set of workshops, depending on what's needed. Sometimes we have everyone in together, if that's what's needed, and sometimes we do it separately. So in a big industrial town where we worked, we had a workers' forum specifically, we had a First Nations forum, we had 3 different public forums. We met with people who were in the service sector, and we met with 4 different industry groups separately as well, rather than lumping them in together. So you have to design based on what the situation is. Cool. There was somebody down, yeah, Dolores.
I was thinking a clash is a good way to get things moving. So if we don't have a clash at the moment, how do we get the...
How do we get to it?
So Dolores is reflecting that, you know, clashes can be a good way to get things going, and if we don't have one, how do we get one? I don't think you have to have a clash. I think.
But how do you get a community to stand behind the idea of doing things before there's
before there's
rides down the street.
I think that's a conversation for you to have. What I've noticed is this conversation is already live, and people are wanting to have it. Like this room is full. Like I'm just like nobody's ever heard of me here. So I think the appetite's there, and you can start the conversation before it blows up. So I think that's the, you know, this is what we're going to talk about and what Kate wants to do. Yeah.
Like at 7 o'clock.
Oh, and it's 7 o'clock.
Which was the time where we were imagining that we would shift into the next piece. So thank you, Dolores.
There were two
more.
There were 2 more. Do you want to just both say what you were going to say, and then we can wrap this bit up?
I can say I was just going to ask you about biodiversity credits.
I reckon you know more about biodiversity credits than I do. So basically, it's a work in progress. So like there's carbon credits that are available to people who can demonstrate that they are sequestering carbon by whether it's tree planting or seaweed projects or the things that are drawing carbon out of the atmosphere. It is complicated, but people can get credits for that. And in different countries, the rules around it are very different. So it's going to be a similar thing around biodiversity. So can you show that what actions you're taking in terms of your land management practices are increasing biodiversity? But it's sometimes feels a bit hocus pocus to me, and it's been very contentious in Australia that the methodology has come into question. But it's actually been a good thing, because now there's a lot of people watching it and trying to make it work, because there's been a lot of companies that have taken advantage of that and getting a lot of money in. So the criticism in some parts of Australia is these companies are buying it up and then locking up. They're buying it from older farmers who have all of their wealth tied up in the farm, so they sell to get the money out for their pension. And then the criticism, how true it is, I don't know that anyone really knows, but in some places at least, they're not then managing the land properly, so feral invasive species are coming in. So they're tightening up the regulations and the monitoring and accountability around that, and also trying to make the scheme more accessible to smaller farmers and family-owned farms as well, because the cost of participating in it and getting accredited is very high in Australia. So there are lots of, again, it's a new thing, it needs a lot of work. And it's a tool. I don't think it's what we should be pegging everything on. The thing that I'm saying is, though, if there is money out there, how do we make sure it gets to where it can make real difference and not just be greenwashing? I think, Kate, we need to get on to... Was there one last point? Nope. Okay, let's get on to like the activity, the discussion, the most interesting bit. So, just to get a taste of like, I guess, the example and what we've been doing in other communities, and I think people are ready to go here, is to actually start, we'll have to work out how to move chairs, but if you can get together maybe in groups of 3 or 4, we're going to just take about 20 minutes to actually have a discussion about this place. Now use the opportunity of me, who really doesn't know anything about this place, to tell me what's special about this place. What do you want to tell me is unique? What do you love and value? And what are your strengths? So think about everything from the skills that you have, the infrastructure, the resources, the networks, the services that make this place special, livable. Like I've been hearing, and then what are some of the, so that spend some time on that. And the second question is, what's already here happening in the town that is generating economic benefits? Could be a business, could be an event, could be some sort of project or initiative that's already here and creating economic benefits, but it's also good for the people of this town. It's aligned with your values and it's good for the environment. So just see how many things you can generate. First of all, describe your place to me. And second of all, how many things can you list that are already here right now? Because I'm hearing about amazing things like the music community hosting, doing work. Prisma. So examples like that. The Blackberry Festival. So those things are also economic enterprises, but there's also small businesses here that are doing interesting things. So if you want to try and move around a little bit, and then we'll get you back around 7:30 to do a bit of a report back. Before Kate goes, Kate was the financing behind just making this stuff happen. So there is a donations jar over there to help just cover the costs of this would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so can you join me in thanking Amanda again? Her generosity, she has not charged anything for speaking here and has been willing to and has really worked. Like she didn't write her presentation until she'd been here, she'd soaked up this place, she'd met people, and she kept sort of thinking about how she was going to approach things and landed on this deeper dive in this incredible example for us. I'm really keen to keep the conversation going. We've asked for your emails. Please make sure that you have, if you don't want to sign a list that everybody else can see, give us a sticky, give us a card. If you have ideas, I would love to know. There will be another follow-up conversation. And Claudia, I want to give a shout out to you and thank you for coming forward and saying, because Claudia's works on films about this kind of transformation, wants to interview Amanda, which will happen tomorrow, and there will be a footage for this. So if there's someone who couldn't be here who should know about what's happening, that we will create a link to this, and I get goosebumps when I say that, that would really love for the word to spread far and wide about this possibility for people to be as activated as I sense we are. And so again,
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank Kate.